Okay, so recently I posed the question, where is the Garden of Eden? Does it exist? And if so, where does anybody know where it is today? Okay. I found the answer. And the answer, fascinating enough, or what's most fascinating off of hearing some of those speculations of you guys, um, is the fact that there's some like people that are from Africa that answered or gave their insight of where they think it could be. Um, and it's just very, I understand the why now, but it's very fascinating that those in Africa do not know this answer. So anyhow, I'm going to give you guys the cliff notes. Do not take my word. This is not my opinion. I'm not into exchanging opinions, whereas I understand we can all speculate, but I hold zero value on speculation. So anything that I say, please cross reference. Now, I'm going to only give you guys the cliff notes to find it, but if you wanted to understand like the why or the how, um, feel free to reach out to me and I could probably help out or at least direct how to come up through like a whole series of ways of how to get to that answer, but taking the long route, like the scenic route, so you really have a visualization of how it all happened. Um, but you need three key elements to figuring out this answer. And one is the understanding of geography, but not geography in the now. You have to have a strong base of history, like the history of geography. Whereas what land masses were called prior to them being conquered over by another people or colonized over by another people. The other thing that you need is the history behind language. I'll give you an example. We use the term Jewish, right? But Jewish are basically those that were Hebrew or are Hebrew. It's just that the letter J does not exist in the Hebrew alphabet. So therefore, it's not like Hebrew people just woke up one day like, hey, let's change our name to Jewish. That's not what happened. It means that those who were conquered, who had conquered over them, that's what they chose to name them. This is what would be the letter J would consist of within their alphabet or language. So, and then the third piece is you have to follow the history of those that were in power. So the key to that is in the Bible where it states that Jesus, talks about Jesus being crucified, it does state that the Jewish people, Hebrew people, needed to seek the council of the Roman council for permission to crucify Christ. Well, if you're in your house and you want to do something, you're not going to go and ask your neighbor if you could do something in your house, unless your neighbor had came into your house, broken in, enslaved you, conquered over you, and basically controlled you within your own household. Then you would have to ask them before you do something. So that would be the clear indication that obviously the Roman Empire would have conquered over Jerusalem. But in the Bible, it doesn't state exactly when the Roman Empire conquered over that land that they then called Jerusalem. So you have to first, I would pose the question, when did the Roman Empire conquer over Jerusalem? Okay, when did the Roman Empire conquer Jerusalem? Seek that information out. Even pause this just to go do it so you have the answer, okay? And specifically note whatever the date is or year is, keep a mental note whether or not that was before Jesus was born or after Jesus was born. Then while you're at it, ask the question, basically find out how long the Roman Empire conquered over or was in control of the of Jerusalem. See if that date is after Jesus had been crucified and resurrected or before. Find out what those dates are. Keep a mental note, okay? Now, strip everything. So I'm in America, right? I was born in America, grew up, got taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America, and the Pilgrims and the Indians were friends, and they shared food together with all this imagery. And then you get older, and it dawns upon you, like, wait a minute, how did somebody discover a land that already had people in it? It just seems kind of like bully mentality to try to do that, right? So obviously, Christopher Columbus, the Portuguese explorer, did not discover a land that already had people in it. The only thing that they could have discovered would be the first of their own kind to discover that land. But they did not discover that land in terms of being the first people to acknowledge this land or land on this land, right? So clearly, discover is used heavily as an alternative word to conquering over, because if you start teaching it as conquering over, you have to think about all the horrific evil acts that are done to humanity in order to conquer over a people, right? So very strong like change in words that really can shape a person's narrative into thinking that there's nothing wrong with somebody discovering something versus conquering over a people. um, so since we know that that's not true, and where is Portugal? Portugal is out, in Spain, and where Spain is, Portugal, part of the what we now call Europe, right? They speak like that. We're essentially Latin and Spanish, the languages like originate from. Now, if you go back in time, before it was called Europe, before those names existed, it would have been basically like the hub or near the hub of the main Roman Empire, right? So it's like those that we're calling Portuguese from Portugal or Spanish people from Spain, their ancestry is basically those in the Bible and prior to the biblical time, as we call it or read about. But basically, they're a part of the Roman Empire. Their ancestry are those that ran the Roman Empire. Um, so then follow them, since they conquered over what we call Jerusalem in the biblical time. Then centuries later, they use the term discover, but realistically, it's they conquered over what we call now America. Follow it back a little bit further. This is where it sparks the question: what else? Where else did they did this to? Because if I ask the question, what was America called before America, nobody's going to know the answer, because in American history they don't teach you that. So it's kind of like the history begins wherever those that conquered over the land decide to have it begin and teach, and then teach it in a narrative that obviously doesn't make it look like they are evil beings, right? But there's nothing godlike about enslaving a whole bunch of people, who obviously God also created, um, for the sake of benefit and gain and power and control. There's nothing godlike about that at all. That's rather the opposite. So since we understand kind of the pattern, the behavioral patterns of Rome, like the Roman Empire back during when Christ was alive, and modern day Roman Empire, hence Europe, hence America, because obviously the Europeans came over into America, right? Um, Follow it back further than that. So there is no black person that I've ever come across. It's not to say that there's not other black people that know this answer. I'm sure there's a few around here and there, and I'm sure much more will piece it together and figure it out on their own without anybody pointing them in the direction over time. But if you ask any like black American, like, tell me about your history, right? Okay, black people in America have gone through numerous names, like how Hebrew went to Jewish. Think about like what has been done to those that they say are like descendants of the slaves of Africa, right? You go from like Negro to colored to the government recognizing as black to the government then recognizing or identifying as African American. And prior to that, there were other derogatory terms. And then prior to that, basically for the longest time, black people in America were not even under the government seen as human beings. They weren't even considered human beings. So think of this: the main country that brands itself with God Bless America It's the same exact country that's founded under the premise that they didn't even look at black people as being human. Okay? Now, let's go back deep now. So if I ask any black person the question, who discovered Africa? Just like I would have like never have even thought to even ask that question, because I just feel like it would have been something that's a given. But I'm asking you, right? Majority of you are not going to know this answer. Who discovered Africa? Nobody will really know that answer, because it just sounds comical to even ask that. But if you look at the behaviors of the Roman Empire, that's when you might want to question, like, I'm curious, because black people, whether they're in America or they're out in Jamaica, they like have all these different terms now that only start at the history of when the slavery or the conquering occurred. That's why there's nothing that's really known or taught to prior to the slavery time, which I find very coincidental. So, actually go and look up who discovered Africa. Now, if the person is not somebody that would appear or look black, there's something that is odd about that. But go ahead and pause this and go and look at it and then come back, right? Also, find out when did... Okay, so the answer that you're going to find, right, is you're going to find that it wasn't a black person, right? And it's all relevant to the Roman Empire. Now, find out when... So if you find that out, that means that somebody conquered over it. Whatever the term discovered is, just switch it out for conquered, right? And then think of all the horrific acts that would have to go on to a people to fully conquer over them, to even change the name of their land, right? But whoever conquers something usually names it whatever they want, right? It's like you go to the moon and then you put the flag down, or you like claim something, right, when you conquer over it. So that would mean that since a black indigenous person of Africa did not discover it, that would mean that they probably didn't name it. But it's not going to tell you that answer when you ask who discovered it. You have to further ask the question, because a lot of the information is in layers, right? So then you have to ask who named Africa. So you want to pause this video and then go and ask the question, who named Africa, and find that answer out, okay? Once you have that answer, okay, now what we want to find out is what was the name of Africa before Africa, right? So now you want to stop the video again, and you'll want to go find out what was Africa called before Africa. And that word is going to be the exact word that is not found in the Bible, but it's the exact word in its origin that directly translates to the answer we all been looking for, the Garden of Eden. So, with that being said, people, you have to go back and change all of the imagery that has always been there when it comes to Adam and Eve looking like European figures with the leaves around their head in the form of a crown, very similar to like the same ring around the head that Jesus was on the cross. It's that Greek origin type of crown used, like Caesar, okay? This is why the imagery looks like that, all right? So now you have to go back, and since now that we know the answer of where Garden of Eden is translated from, we have to change the imagery, because God is truth, right? It's only the devil that will deceive or lie, right? So to seek truth is to seek God. So it's not about anybody taking any pride in this, right? Whatever color they are, because if it doesn't matter what color they are, then why can't we just make it the color that we know that they are, right? Once the fact is on the table, right? So now that we know where the Garden of Eden is, change the imagery to exactly what those people would look like. And on top of that, that means that those that we're calling black, African American, Jamaican, anyone that's ancestry is coming from the term Africa, right? Africa is not the original name, nor did those people wake up one day and say, let's change our name to African, okay? So under our human right, we have the right to live under true history, right? And embrace that. it doesn't matter. I don't need to ask the American government to acknowledge me for something that I already now know that I am. So it's just for me to embrace it now. From a Christian standpoint, it liberates me because now I don't have to question those things. Now everything makes sense to me. So therefore, I further know that the Bible is true. It's just that those that have been in control of it have not always been the greatest of people. So you have to learn how to weed out narrative coming and deriving from evil acts and strip it from that to get the true source. Which, if the devil was smart to deceive people, don't you think that the devil would probably try to get his hands on the Bible to steer and change information to cover up those that are actually been doing the devil's work ever since mankind almost began? Like, follow the Roman Empire all the way back to even find out when the Roman Empire conquered over Africa, and look and see if that date is before Jesus was born or after Jesus was born, and see if it was before they conquered over Jerusalem or before they conquered over Jerusalem. Then you'll be able to make a lot more sense out of all this. But technically speaking, if you look at me or anybody that's black, right? Every time you call them black or African something descent, basically, if we strip the evil narrative out from history and we go back to its origin, the original name of African is Alkebulan. So technically, I would be Alkebulan American, which translates to Garden of Eden American, right? This is why when everybody takes a DNA test, even if you're black or not, you always have a slight hint of Africa, some country in Africa. That's because strip the term Africa and go back to its original word, Alkebulan, Garden of Eden. Everybody has a piece of the Garden of Eden in them, even by way of their own DNA. So that means everybody in Africa has been living in the Garden of Eden. Hence, also makes you think, look how many horrific things have been done to that land over time. And this is the sacred land that God created mankind on, right? And look at those that even preach or create the Bible in the English format so that way those in the Roman Empire would know how to read it, right? Think about all the horrific things they did to the Garden of Eden for centuries.